the elections, it, it caught everybody's eyes, journalists, medias, and people are very concerned because, as you said, it's the first one after the national security law and after the overhaul, the so-called improved reform by the regimes. But we all know that it's a sham elections. It bears no legitimacy. It bears no elements of the democracy or freedom at all. So people, even they were given ballot paper, but what they vote for, the people don't truly represent them. Why am I saying this? Because people understand that those people, those so-called candidates, they, in order to be able to be a candidate, they have to go through political vettings and screenings. And the fact is that quite many of the traditional people from the Democratic camp, they are either in exile, people like me, or in jail. So that's why they are physically contained. So they could not participate in the elections. For the rest of the so-called Democrats, they were the manipulated ones. They were the ones who needs to obey the regimes in order to get the eligibility to run. That's why it's a sham election. So it's the so-called parliament elected now running is nothing more than a rubber stamp of Beijing. So the level of democracy, the degree of democracy has gone down to an all-time low. I would say it's even lower than the time when Hong Kong was a British colony. So it's very sad. It's a huge change, but the world should see it very clearly that it's a sham election.
So there were a lot of images circulating showing some of the desperate measures the government went to in order to encourage people to go to the polling station, including offering free transportation, which obviously did nothing for the turnout. In the end, it was reported that the election saw a turnout of just 30.2%, with 2% being blank or invalid. That was something many pro-democracy supporters encouraged as a form of silent protest. With this election having turned out the way it did, what do you see for Hong Kong's future when it comes to the power of the people?
I think the low turnout itself is self-evident that there's a massive boycott from the Hong Kong people. They refused to accept how the system has turned into. They refuse to legitimize or endorse the system. That's why they refuse to even go into the polling station. That's why the historical low turned out, and it's lower than every district or general election at parliamentary levels in the past after the handover. It's the historical low. And as you mentioned, the turnout for the blank votes, the rate for people voting for blank votes or invalid vote was historical high. And I think it shows that some people are doing protest votes, voting in anger, voting for everyone, or voting a blank vote at all as protest. So you can see the will of the people. It's still there. And I believe it's a massive mobilization of the people that they want to send a clear message to the local regimes and to the international community that the world shouldn't recognize this election as a sham. But then there's the last thing Hong Kongers can do by political mobilizations in not voting or voting informal, because there's literally nothing else that they can do when they're living under the fear of the oppression of the regimes, when they cannot organize street protests, street demonstrations it's become illegal in Hong Kong. People doing that is facing national security charges and put in jails for months and years, and they cannot speak through the media because they are all banned and or they are highly censored, and they cannot rely on civil societies because those NGOs and democratic unions, they are already banned or forced to disband themselves. That's why I would say that's the last thing that people can do to put an informal vote or not to vote in the elections. So as regards to your questions, it shows that the Hong Kongers' futures cannot be very bright at all, and we can see that the regime is not tolerating any dissents, and it's eliminating them and locking every of them in jails. It's very sad and it's very heavy, and not tolerating also civil societies and not tolerating dissent over the media. So I would say the the things that Hong Kongers now can hope for or rely on should be international pressures, international helping hands. That's why international lobbying and advocacy for freedom and democracy outside Hong Kong has become more important. And that's the reason why I left Hong Kong and has gone on to the boat for advocating Hong Kong's freedom and democracy while overseas.
Now, you mentioned that even the media has been undergoing a horrifying transformation. There's been widespread changes after the passing of the National Security Law, and it isn't just that the tone of outlets like the South China Morning Post have changed drastically. It's that outlets who have, as you said, been critical of Hong Kong's government and China have been forced to shut down. And we saw that first with Apple Daily and the arrest of Jimmy Lai, and then more recently we saw the closure of Stan News. And because of that, outlets like Citizen News and Mad Dog Daily announced their closure as a preventative measure to protect their employees. And a lot of Hong Kongers, including myself, relied on those publications to keep up with news back home. How do you see this impacting Hong Kongers abroad?
It has a huge impact as a Hong Kongers abroad myself, because when you are not in Hong Kong, the only means for you to sense the atmosphere or the rhythm or the sentiment in Hong Kong is through online media, and in the past mainstream online media. But with the collapse of Apple Daily and Stan News and Citizen News, these were, I would say, the mainstream media in Hong Kong that's grown to be very powerful, very widespread, and Hong Kongers overseas rely on them so much because they are genuine and they were more relatively impartial and independent from influence of the regimes. That's why they seem to be the only one means through which overseas Hong Kongers can see the real Hong Kong beyond the propaganda of the CCP regimes of Beijing. When they are gone, it's very, very hard for people like me and you and overseas Hong Kongers to see the real side of Hong Kong. And even there are protests and there are corruptions in the government, but either you don't see them on mainstream TV news, or they are they are edited and they were tuned down of all the criticisms towards the government. So it's very, very hard. And in the past, we could like hold a press conference overseas or either in Hong Kong, criticizing government's policies and commenting on the level of freedom and democracy in Hong Kong. And nowadays, if you do that, I doubt very much that how many media organizations in Hong Kong dare report them or send journalists to listen to what you say, because no, they don't do that anymore because it's risky and it's against their their group's interest. They need to survive in Hong Kong, those media groups. And the way of survival is not to report what dissidents and Democrats has to say. So it's very sad. So not only that we lose means of sensing what's happening in Hong Kong for real, and it also we also lack the means of being reported so that people in Hong Kong know what we are doing outside.
Hmm. So from reports, we know that the Stan News arrests were carried out by National Security Department police, but they were based on a sedition law that remained in the crimes ordinance that was introduced during Hong Kong's colonial era. It's the same sedition law under which the General Union of Hong Kong Speech Therapists members were charged after they published a children's book that sort of, in a way, criticised the Hong Kong government. So what do you think the returning use of sedition laws says about the state of Hong Kong and where it's going?
You got the point right. When Apple Daily were first targeted, and the regime were using national security charges against Jimmy Lai for colluding with foreign forces and for subverting state powers, and not so much of targeting the content of what's being reported by Apple Daily as to its sedition in nature or inciting to some other criminal offenses. It's not less like that. But I think the regime in Hong Kong is evolving into using other criminal means and using very old times colonial criminal charges of incitement to incite to of hatred towards the government, etc. Targeting their printed media, targeting speech and news articles and editorials. So I believe it's because with Stand News and with Citizen News, they don't have a very clear targeted person like Jimmy Lai. So the only way they can make up an excuse and to put criminal charges against them is to rely on the law of sedition and incitement. And that's very useful. And that's what we call the universal keys. And so that it fits in any organizations as long as they criticize the government more critically, and it can be perceived by the regime as inciting to hate the government and therefore to subvert power. So, and we have to also clarify that the law now they are relying on with incitement is not actually part of the national security law, but instead they use the very what we call ancient colonial criminal offenses. But I believe in near future, and when the Article 23 and more new other national security laws will be introduced in Hong Kong, at that time the law of seditions will be even more powerful than it is nowadays, and with even heavier criminal sanctions and penalties that will put people in jails for a very long time. So we can see the development that other media organizations will be targeted under the law of incitement or sedition. So it's taking wider and more control of media groups and the media and journalism industry in general in Hong Kong by the regime.
Yeah, it's understandable, and we've touched on this already, but it's understandable that certain outlets may be forced to, as you said, self-censor and inevitably end up pushing the Chinese state's narrative in Hong Kong and around the world. So how do you feel that those of us around the world can combat that?
It's very hard when we are overseas and we cannot organize like activities. We cannot do political mobilizations like we did in Hong Kong. But what we can do is to develop the Hong Kong diaspora more as a nation, and from where we develop into more solid uh, overseas um, civil society and groups, and that's how we gain our power, and that's how we can be heard uh, in in by different governments and parliaments in the world. And that's how, when people are doing political persuasions, lobbying, and advocacy work for Hong Kong's freedom and democracy, the reason for many politicians and officials in different parts of the world will listen to you is that they can see Hong Kong is a powerful nation, or at least stakeholders, huge stakeholders, with voters' powers, with resources, with education, and that's how they would listen to you. And we need to be more organized, uh, and more incorporated into like an umbrella organization. And yes, I believe that's how we begin our work on international advocacy. And so to to be back on the ground, what can we do as ordinary Hong Kongers outside? We gather, we we joined Hong Kongers associations and groups, and we try to contribute what we have, our knowledge, our expertise, and we help each other. And we finally see some advocacy group growing in different parts of the world. Support them in any ways, and financially or volunteering, and they will grow into different groups that's in line and that work abreast with other Hong Kongers groups in the world. So we make our structures more clearer by in time.
Hmm. So one of the last topics that I wanted to cover was quite a serious development. It's the appointment of Peng Jingtang as commander of Hong Kong's PLA garrison. So he's the former chief of staff of the paramilitary organization People's Armed Police Force in Xinjiang, where he's said to have led the CCP's crackdown on Uyghur people who are right now facing a genocide. That's what he has as his background. Do you have any fears concerning his appointment? And if you do, what are they?
I do have a lot of worries, and to me it's quite obvious. Hong Kong is going to be a place not ruled by law, and it's ruled by force, ruled by the violence of the regimes. Now, if you can see locally from Hong Kong's structure itself, I mean, the PLA aside, you can see that even the second people in the government, the secretary, is former police with a police background. And you can see the head of the security bureau, it's also the former chief police in Hong Kong. So the very important role regarding governance, regarding security, is run by former police. But that's not enough. If you look at other developments, you would see that even in the 2019 anti-extradition movement, there are rumors, and some actually proven, that there are commands made by the central government regarding military people, regarding what should be done against the protesters, and how to track down should be directed. There were orders made by the PLA people, military people from the central government. So even at that time, the Hong Kong police was very influenced by the PLA. And in recent times, it's made more blatant in quite many training sessions and passing out ceremonies. And the police the Hong Kong local police has changed in their parades, in their marching styles. That's changed into the PLA styles, and commands made were made in Mandarin. So you can already see the Hong Kong police is highly influenced by the PLA. So now with these new guides and the new heads in the PLA garrisons with military former chief, you can see that it's a sign. It's a very clear sign that it will take further control of the Hong Kong police, or at least they will be cooperating a lot more, and to make the Hong Kong police look more like a military organizations than the police. And yes, so Hong Kong would be a police state and run by police people with police backgrounds, or now go one step further with a military background. I think that's only a matter of time that it will happen.
Hmm. And there are several analysts who would agree with you. They've pointed out that Hong Kong might resemble places like Tibet or even Xinjiang in the future. In your time abroad, how willing have you found the international community to be in taking those fears seriously?
I think that the world is changing. The world's attitude and the perception of China has been changing. It's been changing. For example, when I was first arrived in Australia, it's not that widespread notion that China can be a serious threat uh, towards Australia and towards the world. But nowadays, if you ask even ordinary people in Australia around me, they would agree that China is a big threat, and it's the spread of its suppressions is not only against Hong Kong and Taiwan and Tibet and also the Uyghurs, it's against everyone. Because when even it's not a military power, uh, to Taiwan it's a military threat, but to other countries it's the so-called soft economic power that's been influencing and manipulating markets and buying up capitals in other countries as a means of controlling or manipulating people's behavior in that, even high officials in that country. So when it goes to a level or to a stage where even high officials and even politicians cannot openly comment on human rights in China or in other parts of the world, then I ask whether that country is in freedom at all. Even they have the physical freedom, but they lost their freedom of speech. They lost their um, their motive or incentive to speak for others who are deprived of their liberties in the world. So is that real freedom? To me, no. So I think this logic is being thought and realized by quite many in the world. So we can see now the world is taking China more seriously and more towards an isolating or boycotting approach, but not doing enough in concrete actions. You can see many countries is having hard talks against Beijing regimes, is boycotting the Winter Olympics, but not all countries are doing the same. And you can see the EU, for example, has passed resolutions in the European Parliament condemning the human rights abuses in Hong Kong and with the Uyghurs. But there lacks concrete actions. The sanction has not come yet, and even the sanction has not made by the UK government yet. And there has a lot of consideration behind the scenes, I would say, with regards to the impact that it can make towards their local economy. It makes sense, but that's at the same time, I would say that I'm grateful for the attitude and the statements ever made, but we need more concrete action. And in that regards, they might not be doing enough yet.
Just if I could ask this as well, and I mean, I know I didn't include this beforehand, but if you're able to answer, places like Sweden, where recently they clarified that the reason that they won't be attending the Beijing
Mm.
Winter Olympics, but that it was only because of COVID and not because it's a diplomatic boycott. What do you say to stances like that?
I think stances like that are embarrassing. And not only Sweden and a few more nations has taken that stand, for example, New Zealand. And I think you cannot want to please Beijing or keep a very good diplomatic relations or trade relations, but at the same time you want to join your allies from the democratic world that you're part of them. You cannot take benefits of the both. It's very, very hard and it's very embarrassing. And people, even ordinary people, uh, of different countries can see that it's happening, and it can be quite um, ridiculous in a sense that you cut ties uh, between human rights and trade, and human rights are human rights, trade are trade. Some governments are taking this kind of attitude, but I would say this will not be accepted by the people, at least your own citizens. People make fun of it. It's embarrassing, and so it's sad that quite many are taking this attitude. But at least I can also hear some uh, even taking COVID as an excuse of not joining the Winter Olympics. At least they are expressing their concerns over human rights. And I hope at least that's the bottom line. That's the line that they should follow.
Hmm. So going to the ordinary people, for those who up until now may not have really known what was happening in Hong Kong and are just now trying to find some way to help, how would you recommend that they get into it, that they start taking a stand? Where's a good place to begin?
Yes, and yeah, that's a good question. Um, because quite many are aware that China is a threat and is threatening the world and spreading authoritarianism around the world, but they may not realize it's happening uh, to them when they are in a safe place in democratic countries. So see Hong Kong as a battlefront for between the two camps in the world, between the free countries and democratic countries and authoritarian governments. If Hong Kong's can be safeguarded, if Hong Kong's are helped by free countries and democratic countries, and if Hong Kong's rights and freedoms can be defended, then I think the democratic camp and free countries camp can be more secure in the defense of China's threat. If Hong Kong has fallen, then you would see other places will also be at risk. For example, Taiwan. For example, nowadays in Ukraine. So that it proves if uh, some other places in the world, even they are remote, when the human rights situations are deteriorating and when they're in danger, if you don't help these places, finally, the authoritarian governments and these barbaric regimes will be after you. That's why consider Hong Kong an example. Consider Hong Kong a battlefront in this battle of defending freedom in the world. And from there, you have the motive to look into what's happened in Hong Kong and what's happening and what will happen in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is an international city, so it's a signal to the world how freedom will go in the future internationally.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, and for those in Sweden, the best way to help is to spread awareness, discuss, or create or sign a petition, urge Parliament, Riksdagen, and the government to take a stand against the CCP and Hong Kong government. And for the Hong Kongers out there, of course, as you say, we have to just keep supporting one another. Thank you so much. That's all the
Hmm.
questions I had. Thanks for
Yeah,
coming.
thank you for your time and for your efforts in supporting Hong Kong all the time. Thank you.
Thank you.